Danger might be closer than you think. Before we begin, like this video, comment where and what time you're watching from, and subscribe for more chilling stories. Now turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's dive into the unknown. Story 1. I've been a night shift nurse for almost 6 years now, and I thought I had seen it all. People talk about hospitals being creepy at night, but honestly, you get used to it. The dim hallways, the distant beeping of machines, the occasional patient talking in their sleep, it all becomes background noise. But last Tuesday something happened that I can't explain, something I haven't been able to stop thinking about since. It started during my second round of the night. I was checking on post-op patients when I noticed the light was on in room 209. That was odd because, as far as I knew, that room was empty. We'd just discharged the last patient earlier that day, and housekeeping hadn't even finished prepping it for the next admission. But through the small window in the door, I could see an elderly man sitting on the edge of the bed, facing away from me. He was in a hospital gown, slightly hunched, his hands resting on his knees. At first I figured I had just missed a late admission. That happens sometimes. Paperwork runs late and we don't get notified right away. I grabbed the tablet we use to check patient records and scrolled through the room assignments. 209 was empty. No name, no orders, no records, just a blank space. That didn't make sense. Even if a patient had just been moved in, there would at least be a pending chart. My first thought was that maybe he was a confused patient from another room who had wandered in. It wouldn't be the first time. We had a few elderly patients with dementia on the floor, and sometimes they'd forget where they were. So I knocked lightly and stepped inside. "Sir, are you all right?" He didn't react at all, just kept sitting there, his back to me. The room was cold, colder than the rest of the floor. I felt it the second I walked in, like the air was heavier. I took a few steps closer, feeling that uncomfortable tightness in my chest you get when something isn't right. "Sir, do you need help?" I asked again. Finally, he moved, just a little. His head turned slightly to the side, just enough that I could see the profile of his face. His skin looked off, pale, almost grayish. Sunken eyes, lips dry and cracked. My stomach twisted in a way I can't explain. I reached for my badge radio, thinking I should call one of the other nurses or security. But right as my fingers brushed against it, the call light for 209 turned off. My eyes flicked to the panel on the wall. There had been no call. The screen was blank, like the room had never been occupied. I looked back at the man and my breath hitched. He was gone. The bed was still unmade, the sheets slightly wrinkled where he had been sitting, but the room was empty. No sound, no movement, just me, standing there in the cold. I backed out of the room, my mind scrambling for a rational explanation. Maybe I was exhausted. Maybe I had just thought I saw someone sitting there. But when I glanced down at my arm, I had goosebumps, and I wasn't imagining those. I went straight to the nurse's station and checked the system again. 209 unoccupied. No admissions, no transfers, nothing. But that wasn't what got me. When I pulled up the previous patient history, the last person in that room had died there 2 weeks ago. Elderly male, no family, no visitors, unclaimed body. My stomach turned to ice. I told myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe I had read about the patient before and my mind was playing tricks on me. That's what I wanted to believe, at least, but something about it wouldn't let me shake the feeling. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't losing it. So I did something I normally wouldn't. I went down to the basement archives. Our electronic system only goes back a few years, but paper records, those go way further. I found the file easily. Name, Henry Caldwell. Died in room 209. No family, no next of kin. The cause of death was listed as complications from pneumonia. The more I read, the worse I felt. Henry had been a long-term patient, in and out of the hospital for months. No visitors, no personal belongings, nothing. The last note from the attending nurse at the time was heartbreaking. Mr. Caldwell asked if anyone had come to see him before he passed. He seemed disappointed when I told him no. My chest felt tight. I could picture him sitting on that bed waiting for someone who never came. I felt this overwhelming sense of guilt, like I had disturbed something I shouldn't have. I put the file back and left the archives as quickly as I could. When I got back upstairs, I avoided room 209 completely, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But then, around 3 a.m., one of the CNAs, Rachel, came up to me looking pale. "Did you just check on someone in 209? She asked. My stomach dropped. I shook my head. "No one's in there." Her face went tight. "I swear I just saw someone walking around in there when I passed by." I forced myself to walk with her to the room, even though every nerve in my body was telling me to stay away. We pushed the door open, and of course, it was empty. The bed looked exactly as I had left it. But then Rachel pointed at the monitor on the wall. My blood ran cold. The heart rate monitor was on. It was still connected to nothing, but it was reading a pulse. We just stood there staring at the screen, neither of us saying a word. The monitor beeped faintly, registering a steady heart rate, but there was no patient hooked up to it. I've seen machines glitch before, but this wasn't that. The room was empty. The leads weren't connected to anything. And yet, something was there. Rachel whispered, "Let's turn it off." She stepped forward to press the power button, but the second her fingers touched it, the screen flatlined. That long, droning beep filled the room, and I swear I felt the air change. Heaviness, like stepping into a space that didn't belong to me. I grabbed Rachel's wrist and pulled her back into the hallway, slamming the door shut behind us. My hands were shaking. "Don't talk about this," I muttered, and she nodded quickly. We left the room in silence, walking back to the nurse's station like nothing had happened, but I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I tried to focus on my tasks, flipping through patient charts, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Rachel sat across from me, eyes darting toward room 209 every few minutes. Neither of us spoke about it, but I knew we were both thinking the same thing. We weren't alone in that room. The rest of the shift crawled by, but nothing else happened. No more beeping monitors, no more call lights from an empty bed. By the time the morning shift arrived, the floor felt normal again. Warm, even. As if whatever had been there had finally left. I wanted to believe it was just exhaustion, just a malfunction, just my mind playing tricks on me. But before I clocked out, I took one last look at room 209. The door was wide open now. The bed was still empty, but I swear, the blanket had been pulled back, like someone had just gotten up. Story 2. I've been working at this gas station for almost 2 years now, and the night shifts are usually predictable. Same quiet town, same handful of customers, same routine. It's a lot of truckers, tired commuters, and the occasional local grabbing cigarettes or a coffee. But there was this one guy, an older man, probably in his 70s, who came in every single night, like clockwork, always at 2:17 a.m., always buying the exact same thing, a pack of Marlboros and a black coffee. At first I didn't think much of it. Small towns are full of people with rigid habits. He'd come in, nod politely, pay in cash, and leave without a word. No small talk, no hesitation, just in and out. But after a while I started to notice the little things. His clothes never changed. Always the same faded flannel, the same scuffed up boots. His hands were always cold when I handed him his change, even on warm nights. And then there was his car. I never once saw him pull in or drive. Off. He was just there. One night, curiosity got the better of me. After he left, I stepped outside to watch him go. The lot was empty. No headlights, no sound of an engine. Just the flickering glow of the street lamp and the distant hum of the highway. I stood there for a while, feeling this weird, crawling sensation at the back of my neck. There was nowhere he could have walked from. Not at that hour, not in a town this small. But somehow, every night at 2:17 a.m. he showed up. A week later, I casually mentioned him to my coworker Jake while we were restocking shelves. "The old guy who always comes in for smokes and coffee," I said, expecting some kind of, "oh yeah, he's been coming here forever" response. But Jake just frowned. "Who?" he asked. I thought he was joking. "You know, the guy in the flannel. Comes in every night, same time." But Jake just shook his head, staring at me like I'd lost it. "Dude, I worked the shift before you. I've never seen anyone like that." That didn't make sense. Jake worked until 2 a.m. He should have seen the guy at least once. I laughed it off, saying, "Maybe he just shows up right after you leave." But inside, something didn't feel right. That night when 2:17 a.m. rolled around, I felt this weird pressure in my chest. like I was waiting for something I didn't really want to see. Sure enough, the bell over the door chimed, and there he was. Same flannel, same boots, same blank stare as he slid a pack of Marlboros across the counter. This time, I paid closer attention. His clothes looked off. Not dirty, but old, like they hadn't been washed in years. His hands were ice cold again when I handed him his change, and for the first time, I really looked at them. His nails were cracked, his skin dry and stretched tight over his knuckles like he hadn't been alive long enough to need warmth. My stomach twisted. He grabbed his coffee and walked out. I didn't follow him this time. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was really wrong. So after my shift, I started asking around. I brought it up casually to one of the regulars, an older guy named Bill who had lived in town forever. You ever see an old man come in late at night? Flannel shirt, kinda quiet? Bill just stared at me for a second, then frowned. What are you talking about? I explained. The cigarettes, the coffee, the exact time every night. The more I talked, the more unsettled he looked. And then he said something that made my stomach drop. There used to be a guy like that, he said slowly. Sounds a lot like Frank Henderson, but he died last year. I laughed, but it came out shaky. That's not possible, I said. He was just in here last night. Bill didn't laugh. He just reached for his phone, scrolled for a few seconds, and then handed it to me. I felt my blood turn to ice. It was a news article, a fatal accident, a car crash. And there, in the picture of the wreckage, was Frank's car. I stared at the article, my hands gripping the phone so hard my knuckles ached. The date on the accident? Exactly 1 year ago. It happened just a few miles down the road. He'd swerved off the highway late at night, crashed into a tree, and died on impact. The report said it was a single vehicle accident. No witnesses. No one had seen him crash. No one had seen him leave. I felt sick. My head was spinning, trying to make sense of it. I wanted to believe it was a coincidence, some weird mistake. But when I looked back at Bill, his face was pale. He must have seen something in mine too, because he lowered his voice and asked, "You're sure you saw him? Like, talk to him?" I nodded, barely able to speak. Bill hesitated, then said something I'll never forget. That night he crashed, he was coming back from this gas station. He always stopped here for smokes and coffee. That night I went into work with a pit in my stomach. I told myself I wouldn't look at the clock, wouldn't think about it. Maybe if I ignored it, it wouldn't happen. But when the clock hit 2:17 a.m., my hands started shaking. The bell over the door chimed. I felt my breath catch, my whole body tensing. I didn't want to look. I already knew who it was, but I did. He stood there, just like always. Same flannel, same boots, same blank stare as he walked up to the counter. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. He slid the cigarettes over, but this time I didn't reach for them. I couldn't. I just stared at him. And then, for the first time, he looked directly at me, not past me, not through me, at me. His eyes were dull, almost sunken, like a man long past exhaustion. And then he said something, quiet, almost like a sigh. Did I make it home? My throat went dry. I wanted to say something, anything, but no words came out. I just stood there, frozen, my skin crawling. He didn't seem impatient. He didn't seem angry, just tired, like he'd been trying to get home for a long time. But how the hell was I supposed to answer that? I barely managed to shake my head. No. His expression didn't change, but for the briefest second, I thought I saw something in his face. Sadness, like some part of him already knew. He slowly picked up the cigarettes and coffee, turned, and walked out. This time I ran after him. I didn't care how scared I was, I had to see where he went. But as I stepped outside into the cold night air, my stomach dropped. The lot was empty. No car, no footsteps, nothing. Just the highway stretching into the dark, the wind rattling the empty gas station sign. And just like that, he was gone. I don't know why, but I stood there for a long time, staring at the road, waiting for something. But nothing happened. He never came back. I haven't seen him since. I still work the night shift, still go through the same motions. But every time the clock hits 2:17 a.m., I feel it. That heaviness, that silence. And sometimes, when it's really late and the station is completely still, I wonder, did he finally make it home? Story 3. I never liked closing up the library at night. Something about the way the old building settled after dark made my skin crawl. The distant creaks, the way the fluorescent lights buzzed a little louder when everything else was silent. But it was an easy job and I needed the money, so I tried not to think about it too much. That was until the knocking started. It was a Tuesday night sometime after 11 p.m., and I was the only one left. I was finishing up making sure all the study rooms were locked when I heard it. 3 slow knocks, muffled but distinct. I froze, my ears straining. It sounded like it came from the basement storage room. That didn't make sense. That door was supposed to be locked. Only management had the key, and I sure as hell hadn't opened it. I stood there for a minute just listening, my heart thudding in my chest. 3 more knocks. Slow. Even. It wasn't the pipes, and it wasn't the wind. Someone, or something, was knocking from the other side of that. Driggsy. I told myself it was probably just my imagination. The basement creeped me out, so maybe my brain was making things worse than they were. But then I saw it. The doorknob. It twitched. I swear I stopped breathing. It wasn't a full turn, just a tiny movement, like whoever was inside had barely grazed it. But I saw it. I was sure of it. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave. But instead I did something really stupid. I stepped closer. The air down there was different, heavy, damp, stale, the kind of air that hadn't been moved in years. And as I reached the door, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. There were scratches on the wood, deep, frantic, like someone had been trying to claw their way out. I felt this deep, sinking feeling in my stomach. The scratches weren't old. They were fresh. The raw wood beneath the paint was exposed, jagged in places, as if someone had been digging into it with their nails. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. This door was EI, supposed to have been locked for years. I had never seen it open, and as far as I knew, no one ever went down there. I reached out, hesitating just inches from the handle. My fingers were ice cold, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then, before I could even touch it, 3 knocks, right in front of me, loud, urgent. I stumbled back so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. The door didn't shake, didn't budge, but that sound was so close it felt like someone was just on the other side. And then, the knocking stopped. The silence after the knocking was worse than the sound itself. It stretched on, thick and suffocating, like the air had been sucked out of the basement. My skin was crawling. I felt like if I stood there too long, something would knock again, harder this time. Or worse, the door would open. I needed to leave. I turned to go, but just as I took a step, I noticed something. The keyhole. It shouldn't have mattered. It was just a rusted old keyhole. But I swear for a split second, I saw movement on the other side. A shadow, shifting, something watching. My whole body locked up. I don't know why I did it, but I leaned in, tilting my head to look through. The space beyond was pitch black. No shelves, no light, nothing. Just darkness. But the longer I stared, the more I felt it. Something in there was staring back. I jerked back so fast I nearly lost my balance. My chest was tight, my skin ice cold. I didn't see anything. Not clearly anyway. But I felt it. That horrible, pressing sensation of being watched. It was overwhelming, like whatever was inside that room wasn't just aware of me. It was waiting for me. I don't know how long I stood there breathing hard, my ears straining for any sound, but there was nothing. And then, the doorknob turned. Not a twitch, not a slight movement. It turned. Slowly, deliberately. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I bolted up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, practically throwing myself into the main hall. The second I crossed into the light, I felt it. That weight lifted. Like I had just escaped something that wasn't supposed to let me go. I didn't stop moving until I was out the door, locking up so fast my hands fumbled with the keys. I never checked the basement again. Story 4. I've been working the night shift at this diner for almost a year now. It's one of those 24-hour joints off the highway. The kind that never really closes but feels like it should after midnight. We get the usual late-night crowd. Truckers, night shift workers, the occasional drunk college kid. But most of the time, it's just me and the cook, killing time until sunrise. Nothing weird ever happens. At least, not until the order came in. It was a slow night, dead quiet except for the hum of the fryer in the back. I was wiping down the counter when the drive-through speaker crackled. I jumped. I hadn't heard a car pull in. The sensors hadn't beeped either, but the order screen flickered to life. 1 black coffee. 1 cheeseburger. No onions. A simple order, but something about it felt off. I leaned toward the speaker, my stomach twisting. Hello? Can I take your payment at the window? Silence. I waited a few seconds, listening, but there was nothing. No engine running, no headlights, no tires crunching over the gravel outside, just the distant hum of the highway. I leaned out the window, craning my neck to see around the parking lot, but there was no car. The order was still on the screen, blinking like it was waiting to be prepared. I felt a weird chill crawl up my spine. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe someone had pulled in, placed the order, and then changed their mind and drove off. It wasn't unheard of. Still, something about it didn't sit right. I turned to the cook, Manny, who was leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone. "Did you hear that?" I asked. He barely looked up. "Hear what?" I hesitated. "The drive-through. We got an order, but there's nobody there." Manny shrugged. Not even fazed. "Happens sometimes. Probably a system lag." But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I tried to shake it off, but that nagging feeling wouldn't go away. I deleted the order from the screen and went back to wiping down the counter, trying to ignore the way my arms felt covered in goosebumps. A few minutes passed. The fryer sizzled. Manny flipped through the radio stations, and I almost convinced myself it was just a glitch. Then the order came through again. Same thing. Black coffee. Cheeseburger. No onions. The exact same order down to the last detail. My stomach twisted. I grabbed the headset and pressed the button. "Hello?" My voice cracked slightly. "If you're at the speaker, can you pull up to the window?" Silence. I glanced at the camera feed above the register. The one pointed straight at the drive-through lane. It showed exactly what I already knew. There was no one there. At this point, my hands were sweating. I deleted the order again, but my fingers felt clumsy on the screen. I didn't say anything to Manny this time. I already knew he'd brush it off, but I couldn't ignore the creeping feeling that something was wrong. I forced myself to step away from the counter and walk to the window. Maybe I'd hear an engine, see some prankster hiding just out of view. I unlocked the window and slid it open, letting in the cool night air. Silence. The parking lot was empty, the asphalt slick from an earlier drizzle. A single street lamp buzzed overhead, casting long shadows, but there were no cars, no people, just the faint sound of the wind rattling the sign out front. I stayed there for a minute, waiting, hoping for something normal to happen. A car pulling in, a voice crackling over the speaker. Anything, but the speaker stayed dead. I was about to close the window when something caught my eye. Movement just past the edge of the parking lot. Not a car, not a person walking toward the diner, just something shifting in the dark. I squinted, trying to make it out, but the moment I focused on it, it stopped, like it knew I was looking. A cold wave ran through me. I shut the window and locked it. I turned back to the counter, trying to act normal, but my skin was crawling. I had this horrible feeling in my gut, like if I looked outside again, I'd see something standing there staring back. I shook my head and muttered, "Screw this," and went back to wiping down the counter. Then the ticket machine printed an order. I jumped at the sound, my breath catching in my throat. The screen was blank. The drive-through was silent, but the machine had printed the same damn order. I snatched the ticket off the machine, my hands shaking. Black coffee, cheeseburger, no onions. The paper felt weirdly warm, like it had been sitting under a heat lamp. I looked at Manny, who was still scrolling through his phone like nothing was happening. "Dude," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The machine just printed an order." He finally looked up, frowning. "I thought you said nobody was at the speaker." "I did," I muttered, staring at the slip in my hand. I didn't know what else to say. This wasn't normal. Orders don't just print themselves, but as I turned the paper over, my stomach nearly dropped. On the back, faint like it had been pressed into the paper from the machine itself, were 3 words. "I never left." I dropped the ticket like it burned me. My breath felt too shallow, my chest tight. I never left. What the hell was that supposed to mean? I stared at the paper on the counter, my brain scrambling for some kind of rational explanation. A misprint? A joke? But there was no way. Our machine didn't even print on both sides. Manny must have seen the look on my face because he finally put his phone down. "Dude, you okay?" he asked, but I barely heard him. My eyes drifted toward the camera feed above the register, the one showing the drive-through lane. Something moved. Just for a split second, a flicker of motion near the speaker box. I swear it looked like a figure standing just outside the frame, just far enough that I couldn't see any details. My whole body tensed, and then the drive-through speaker crackled to life. The static was loud, sharp, like someone had pressed the button but wasn't speaking. I felt my skin prickle as I forced myself to reach for the headset. My fingers were ice cold. "Hello?" My voice came out weaker than I wanted. The static continued, dragging on for a few seconds. Then, through the crackling, I heard it, breathing. Not normal breathing, shallow, labored, like someone who had been out in the cold too long or someone barely holding on. My throat tightened. I turned to Manny, wide-eyed, and he must have seen how pale I looked because he finally got up. "What is it?" he asked, his voice suddenly serious. I couldn't answer. I was too focused on the sound in my ear. The breathing wasn't coming from the speaker anymore. It was coming from inside the diner. I ripped the headset off and spun around so fast I nearly tripped. The diner was empty. Just the hum of the fryers, the flickering neon sign outside, and Manny staring at me like I'd lost my mind. But I knew what I heard. It was close. Too close. My pulse hammered in my ears as I scanned the room, looking for anything. Anyone. And then my eyes landed on the booth in the far corner. The seat was pulled out slightly. The napkin dispenser had been moved. And on the table, right next to an empty coffee cup that hadn't been there before, was a faded paper receipt. My stomach dropped as I stepped forward, my hands clammy as I picked it up. The ink was smudged, barely readable, but I could still make out the date. Exactly 1 year ago. The order: black coffee, cheeseburger, no onions. I don't know how long I stood there staring at it, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. The fryer sizzled behind me. The neon lights buzzed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still here, watching, waiting. I quit the diner 2 weeks later. Manny still works there, and when I see him around town, he never brings it up. Neither do I. But sometimes when I drive past the place late at night, I swear I see something. Just a shadow in that same corner booth, sitting there, waiting for their order. Story 5. I've worked security in this office building for a few years now, and the night shift is usually mind-numbing. Just me, the cameras, and the occasional cleaning crew coming and going. The building itself isn't creepy, just empty. Rows of cubicles, silent hallways, the hum of vending machines. But a couple of months ago, something weird started happening on the feeds. Motion alerts from a stairwell that shouldn't exist. It was 2:43 a.m. the first time I saw it. I was flipping through the camera feeds when one flickered. The east stairwell. My stomach sank. That didn't make sense. The east stairwell had been sealed off years ago after renovations. There was no access to it anymore. No doors leading to it, no way for anyone to get inside. But on the screen, plain as day, was movement. Something shifting just beyond the view of the camera. I sat up straight, rubbing my eyes like maybe I was seeing things. But the motion sensor had triggered. That only happens when something, or someone, moves. The camera was angled toward the landing, where the stairs used to continue downward before the lower floors were blocked off. The space beyond should have been nothing but concrete walls. I flipped to the hallway feed, checking the area outside where the old stairwell door used to be. Nothing. No signs of anyone. But when I switched back to the stairwell feed, I felt my stomach drop. The dust on the floor had been disturbed. It wasn't much. Just a faint trail, like footsteps leading down. But the dust in that stairwell had been undisturbed for years. And now, something had walked through it. I stared at the screen, my pulse hammering in my ears. The building had cameras in every main area, but there weren't any inside the blocked-off stairwell. Just this one, angled toward the landing. I couldn't see where the footsteps led. I couldn't see what made them. But I knew one thing for sure. They hadn't been there before. For a second, I thought about ignoring it, just letting it go, but my gut wouldn't let me. I grabbed my flashlight and my radio and made my way toward the east wing. The halls were quiet, just the low hum of the vending machines and the occasional creak from the vents. When I got to the old stairwell door, I stopped. My chest felt tight. The door itself had been sealed over with drywall years ago. There was no way in or out, but the air in front of it felt wrong, heavy, stale, like the air in a room that hadn't been touched in years. And then, from the other side of the wall, I heard a sound. A single footstep. I felt my whole body tense. It wasn't the building settling. It wasn't the pipes. It was a footstep. Slow, deliberate, right on the other side of the wall. I took a shaky step back, gripping my flashlight so tight my knuckles ached. That stairwell was sealed. There was no door, no way in. But someone, or something, was inside. I forced myself to move, flipping on my radio with my free hand. "Dispatch, I've got movement near the old east stairwell." My voice came out strained, too quiet. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. The radio crackled, and then a familiar voice. "Rick, the guy on the morning shift. East stairwell? That area's been blocked off for years, man." "I know," I whispered. "Then why is there someone inside?" Rick must have heard the tension in my voice because he went quiet for a second. Then, through the static, he said, "I'll check the old logs. See if maintenance ever did anything with that area. Hold tight." Hold tight? Screw that. I was already backing away, keeping my flashlight trained on the drywall-covered door. My instincts screamed at me to leave. But then, a second footstep. It was slower. This time, closer. The kind of sound you make when you're testing the ground beneath you. Like something was stepping up from below. My breath hitched. The stairwell should have led downward. Except there was no down anymore. Just solid concrete. My mind raced. What the hell was I hearing? And then, the drywall creaked. The sound sent a bolt of panic through me. Something was pressing against the other side. Not banging, not kicking. Pressing. Like it was testing the wall, feeling for weakness. My stomach twisted. I took another step back, my boots scuffing against the floor, and the second I did, the sound stopped. I held my breath, listening. The air was heavy, thick with that horrible stale scent of dust and old concrete. Silence. No more footsteps. No more movement. But somehow, that was worse. I suddenly had the awful feeling that whatever was behind that wall knew I was there. That it was waiting, watching. And then, a whisper. So faint I almost missed it. From the other side of the, wall. "Help me." My body locked up. I know I heard it. A whisper barely above the sound of my own breath. But the way it came through the wall, too clear, too close, it felt wrong. My throat was dry, my mind screaming at me to turn and run. But my feet wouldn't move. I don't know why, but I whispered back, "Who's there?" Nothing. The air felt thick, suffocating. My own pulse pounded in my ears. I stared at the wall, heart hammering, waiting for a response. And then, scratching. Slow, dragging, like fingernails against drywall. I felt a chill run straight down my spine. That was it. I was done. I turned and bolted, nearly dropping my flashlight as I rushed back toward the security room. I didn't stop running until I slammed the door behind me.